Good morning, everybody in Facebook world. We've already said good morning here in the building to each other, so we'll jump right into it. The text today comes from Isaiah chapter 40, and it's verses 12 and 13, and then it jumps to 25 and through 31. So I'll read the text first, and then we'll start going into the context and the verses. Verse 12. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who can fathom the spirit of the Lord, or instruct the Lord as his counselor? To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youth grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. So the introduction it talks about, it says, back in 2007, Nebraska State Senator Ernie Chambers filed a lawsuit against God. Chambers, who was seeking a permanent injunction against God, whom Chambers blamed for causing various natural disasters. The lawsuit further accused God of the crime of failing to stop terroristic threats. Chambers stated that he had tried to contact God about these matters on multiple occasions, but without success. This man knew that he had no hope of winning a lawsuit against the Almighty. He filed the lawsuit in an attempt to make a broader point about the wastefulness of frivolous lawsuits. So when I was reading this, I actually looked back. This did happen in 2007. I don't know in the research that I did that he was trying to make a point of frivolous lawsuits, but not being able to understand the agenda of politicians is nothing new. So I kind of passed on the rest of that. It says, the Bible offers us various word pictures of God's heavenly courtroom. Certain passages are narratives regarding the individuals who are present, one or more of judge, jury, prosecutor, victim, defendant. Also suggested are locations in the courtroom, a judgment seat, a witness stand, etc. These serve as warnings regarding who is susceptible to judgment and who is not. So basically saying in no circumstance will God ever sit on the witness stand. You know, that's for us. The lesson context comes from the writings of the Old Testament prophet Isaiah, and it talks about, this is one of the 5 major prophets, and it talks about in the New Covenant era how you're able to judge, prophets. It was very prominent in the Old Testament, but in the New Covenant era, it's based on how many times they're referenced in the New Testament. And by the count, the tallies are Isaiah 67 times, Jeremiah 5 times, Lamentations 0 times, and Ezekiel 2 times, and Daniel 5 times. So Isaiah is, way out in front. It says, these figures reveal the continuing relevance of the book of Isaiah. It has been called the 5th gospel because of its numerous prophecies declared as fulfilled in the Messianic era of the New Testament. Isaiah prophesied during some very dismal times for God's people. His prophetic call came in the year that King Uzziah died. And King Uzziah was the king who was struck with leprosy after he tried to burn incense at the altar, which at the time was reserved for the priests. And it says, the text under consideration in our lesson follows a prophecy that warns King Hezekiah of Judah regarding a time when Babylon would carry away Judah's wealth and the people to Babylon. It says more than 100 years would pass before that happened, but it indeed did happen. This was a punishment from the Lord for the people's sins, followed by comfort in declaring that punishment would eventually end. The predictions that immediately follow in Isaiah shift forward more than 5 centuries for fulfillment. The passage of time from pronouncement to fulfillment of these prophecies makes for valuable study, but the study in today's lesson takes us beyond time-bound prophecies in considering the timeless nature of God himself. So what he's talking about today is not something that's going to come to pass within a linear time frame. This is more, you hear in sports where people say it's a flex, when you can when you have a skill set in something and you can kind of impose your will in the area, it's called a flex. This passage is like a God flex. This is like Isaiah saying, hey, let's stop and remember exactly how powerful God is. So verse 12, it breaks 12 into A and B, but they kind of flow together. It says, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? Today's text comes to us in the form of Hebrew poetry. This style often involves balanced lines known as parallelism. Now, when I read that, I was familiar with the term parallelism, but English wasn't really my forte, except for maybe papers. Does anybody here want to raise their hand and say they know exactly what parallelism is before I read what it is? All right, Facebook, you saw, I don't know if you raised your hand out there. You can call the church office. We've got ladies in there who will take your call if you do know what parallelism is. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you what parallelism to move this along. Parallelism is when you have lines that juxtapose each other and they use synonyms. They're saying the same thing, but they're using different words to describe it. So, for instance, in this one, it was, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? So you see the hollow of his hand and the breadth of his hand. It's basically it's making the same point, but it's using two different lines to get there. The hollow of his hand and the breadth of his hand. The latter refers to the distance from the end of the thumb to that of the little finger. So, in other words, about 9 inches, which Samuel 17:4 kind of breaks that out a little bit more. But it says Isaiah uses this imagery to call attention to things God can do that humans cannot. And it says the rhetorical questions posed are similar to those that the Lord confronted Job with. And in Job 38:5, God talks about creating the foundations of the earth. And it's who has marked off its dimensions and whose measurings. It basically uses the same wording that Isaiah uses here. So, I mean, you think if God can measure the foundations of the earth using just his thumb and his little finger, he's already kind of demonstrating, this is the power that God possesses. And it says modern science allows us to make educated guesses regarding the volume of water in the oceans and the vastness of space in light years. But whatever the unit of measure, no human device can determine those things with exactness. Only the Creator can do that. So you think about over the course of history, there's a line that says, thousands of years ago, we knew that the earth was at the center of the universe. You fast forward 500 years beyond that, we knew that the earth was flat. Not only through time, obviously we figure these things out. God has known this from the beginning because he's the ultimate creator. So it just shows we as humans like to think that we can, we can kind of match that, but we have no idea. You think about what we know now, how that can change in the next 500 years. It says, through rhetorical questions, the prophet provides his reader with the proper perspective of God. The human mind cannot fathom the amount of water in the ocean or the distance of one galaxy to another. However, the Creator can measure the distance using his hand. In verse 12b, it says, who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? So there's more parallelism. We're all going to be experts at this by the time we get out of here. And that whenever Jackson and Jack and whenever they get to this, we'll know what to do. I'll probably have forgotten it by then, but at least we'll have something we can mark it to. We can pull this video up. So you're talking about the mountains and the hills as parallelism, the scales and a balance is more parallelism. Verse 13, Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord or instruct the Lord as his counselor? It says the importance of this verse for the New Testament era is seen in the fact that the Apostle Paul quotes it twice, but Paul uses the word mind rather than spirit. Even so, his understanding of what the passage says about God is entirely consistent with Isaiah's. God has never had to learn anything from anyone. God is omnipotent, meaning all-knowing. So you think about our relationships with each other, it's a two-way street, right? Like I can come to you for advice, you can come to me for advice. We don't share that relationship with God. God never calls down, hey, I want to ask you about this. What do you think about this? He's all-knowing. It's a one-sided relationship. So we can't understand the mind of God, and that's not our place to. That's where you have to kind of submit to the power that he possesses. He's omnipotent. We're obviously not. It says Isaiah 40:14 through 24, which comes between the two segments of our lesson text, continues the prophet's confrontational questions, and one of these we'll expound on in the next verse. It talks about the declarations of the Lord's superiority to the nations, idols, and earthly rulers. Verse 25, to whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One. The prophet raised this question earlier in Isaiah 40:18, and it reminds us that we should be extremely cautious with statements that start with God is like, because the next word will result in the Creator's being compared to something he has created. Even so, Isaiah's question, to whom will you compare me, does not forbid certain figurative language from being used. And it talks about the illustrations of God in various roles. And it talks about throughout the Bible, he's been compared to a shepherd, a rock, a shield and a sword, a fortress, and that of a winged feathered creature. And it's obviously, that's not saying that God is equal to these things. That's just certain elements that God fulfills. That's what those illustrations represent. It's not saying that God is a rock or God is an eagle. But to dig in further, it referenced Isaiah 40:18, which is not in our text, but I thought it was something that kind of added to the text. So I'm going to pull that up. Bear with me just a minute. It's actually 40:18 and 19. And I thought this kind of drove home the point. It says, well, whom then will you compare God? To what image will you liken him? As for an idol, a metal worker casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold, and fashions silver chains for it. So this was in the time where idolatry was still very prevalent. And you think about, to create those idols, it took a man to create the idols. The idols were created by the hands of man. Man is created by God. So when you look at it from that angle, what idol would compare to that? And I think that's the point that Isaiah was really trying to drive home. Verse 26a, lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry hosts one by one. And it says, Isaiah calls attention to the heavens as he did previously and will do again. And it says, worship of the starry host was explicitly forbidden, but it happened anyway. It talks about how, if you read 2 Kings, they worshipped the starry host, and it was related to Baal. And it said, with promised punishment that followed, and it referenced Jeremiah 8, and that's basically talking about the valley of the slaughter. And it says, avoiding such idolatry begins with realizing that there's a creator behind these stars. To worship created things rather than the creator is to invite the death penalty. And I think we get caught up in that. We love what we can see. We love what appeals to the senses, things that we can see, hear, and touch. I think sometimes we can lose track of who created that. It's one thing, like you go out, even last night, I went out to walk Fenway, and you could see several stars. That's always nice to look at, but how often do you stop and think, wow, that was God's work? It's easy to get caught up in the visuals. It's important to remember what's behind the visuals. The insert was creation sights, creator insights. It says, our family enjoys traveling and seeing the creation of God. The mountains are always on our list of favorite places. My love of facts sometimes hinders my enjoying the fantastic view. While family members absorb the sight of the mountain, I'm busy searching on my phone for facts to proclaim about the mountain. It says, we live 114 miles from Denali, the highest mountain in North America. You can see the 20,310-foot mountain from 150 miles away in clear weather. The prophet Isaiah's directives imply that in pondering the majesty of creation, one learns more about the Creator. Pondering creation allows us to come up to a proper conclusion regarding our place in it and our relationship to the Creator. Both involve looking up. How long has it been since you did so? So that just kind of further drives home the point. As we look at these wonders, we have to remember what's behind it. Excuse me. Verse 26b, and calls forth each of them by name because of his great power and mighty strength. Not one of them is missing. It says elsewhere in the Bible records the name of some stars in their constellation. It talks about Job and Amos, and it does mention specifically Orion's belt in those texts. So that was something that was they were aware of in that time. As with English, astronomy is not really one of my strong suits. So I couldn't tell you. I mean, stars are nice. I couldn't tell you exactly what I'm looking at. But it talks about in that time period, they recorded the constellations, but the way stars work, there were stars that were invisible to the naked eye at that time. So God knew those stars before these people could even see them with a naked eye. And it moves on to 27. It says, why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God? And it talks about there's more parallelism here. Jacob and Israel, obviously one name. And to say, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God. They're saying the same thing. They're just using different words to get there. But the point he's driving home is nothing is hidden from God's sight. So I think we get caught up in that sometimes where you'll be going through something and you'll think, hey, I'm right here. I'm going through this. When do I get my, when does my rebate come in? We think he doesn't know. He knows. And verse 28 says, do you not know, have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. It says the implication is that nothing is ever concealed from God. It's inconceivable that the reader should plead ignorance to the facts that follow. So again, it's driving home that point that we know what we're wrapped up in. We're obviously focusing on ourselves. God is aware. God is aware of what we're going through before it ever happened, and where we're going from that moment. And it talks about how God is not susceptible to human limitations. He does not tire. He never becomes exhausted. He neither slumbers nor sleeps. And I thought about this. It's talking about, you kind of compare it to mental exhaustion. You think about times when you're busy, maybe you're at work or something's going on at home, and all of a sudden your phone starts blowing up with texts or emails, and you're thinking, oh, here we go again. Do you think God ever does that? You think of how many prayers go up at any given moment. Do you think he's too busy? He's thinking about, oh, I'm working on Jamie's problems right now. Here comes Jared with 10 more. Give me a break. Yeah, he doesn't. That doesn't work that way with God. He's never tired. He's never mentally tired, physically tired, emotionally tired, and spiritually tired. It says, these truths expressed in this passage and throughout the scriptures concerning the Lord and his uniqueness are why prophets such as Isaiah speak so passionately against the sin of idolatry, because there's no idol that can compare. That's what this whole passage is about, is basically saying, all right, you've got this over here that you worship. Can it do this? And it's all, the questions are all rhetorical because the answer is no. It says, idol worshipers do no harm whatsoever to God, who remains the same everlasting God described by Isaiah. They harm only themselves by following such delusions. So God's not worried about, God's not scared of these idols, but it's basically why we're so close-minded, because while we're not worshiping golden calves and everything these days, there are still earthly idols that take us away from focusing on the power that God possesses. So it's not like God's not worried about my phone. He's not worried about car payments or house payments or anything like that or whatever we're focused on. But it's our problem. He's worried about us. Verse 29, he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. It says, the promise of strength from the Lord, especially during times of human frailty and weakness, resonates throughout Isaiah and is found in numerous passages of the Psalter. The issue is one of trust, since God has his own timetable for replacing our weakness with his strength. Trust requires waiting, which is the hard part. We talked earlier about how hard it is to wait and have to, we want to know. That's just our mindset. And I'm the world's worst of, no, you got to tell me now exactly how this plays out. I can't take it anymore. That's not how it works. That's where that trust factor comes into play, where we have to circle back and know, all right, how many times have you ever been up against something and it not worked out if you just stayed your path? Verse 30, even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. And this verse in 31, you see this verse a lot, and it's usually tied to athletics, because it's usually talking about weariness. You're talking about being tired, and you're in some kind of competition. The angle this text took was more spiritual weariness, and I thought that was interesting because it says physical strength is an asset that can prove useful in numerous situations. The ability to do more than expected can last only as long as the adrenaline does, but inner spiritual strength comes from the Lord. Inner spiritual strength from the Lord is what provides the endurance to resist the temptations frequently encountered in a world broken by sin. So think about how many times you have that weariness from a spiritual perspective. When you're overwhelmed, you're going through something, and it just seems to compound, and you can't navigate through that. There's just, you're thinking, well, what's the next, where's the next shoe drop? That's from a spiritual perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're physically exhausted, but sometimes spiritually we can get to that point. And it says, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And this is talking about hope. One of the things I got for Christmas was it was a Max Lucado book it was 10 men of the Bible. And the first one was Noah, and it talked about the olive leaf and that it represented hope. And it talks about throughout the course of our life and throughout your day and your week, when you need that olive leaf and you get it, and what that feels like when you finally get that hope, when you can remember that it's there. It says to hope implies trust in the Lord. An example of impatience and failure to wait is Abraham in Genesis 16. When we wait, we keep faith that God will work his purpose in circumstances, even when, or especially when, the way forward is not obvious to us. But waiting does not come easily in our fast-paced society that often demands instant results. Our tendency all too frequently is to act on our own timing and by our own judgment. We want to keep things moving. And I thought about this is just me, because I know there's a lot of you here that don't have this problem. But when I'm trying to put something together that requires instructions, if I get to a spot where I can't make it work, a lot of times I think, well, I just push harder, it's definitely going to go in, right? And more often than not, you hear that crack of the wood, or something falls out from the other place that you just put something in. That's what that spoke to me. When we try to do it on our own, when impulse takes over, you're going to hear that crack. Something's going to fall out. It's hard to wait. It's hard not to know, but if you just take a second, it usually works out for the better. And I do recommend, read your instructions when you put stuff together. Some of us have to. Some of us don't. Or call your wife to come put it together. I'm not saying I've never done that. And it talks about the imagery of mounting on wings like eagles. And the way they interpreted this is when you're in the clouds like that, when you're soaring like an eagle, you're not worried about what's below. You're not worried about what's going on below you at that point. You feel immune to it. It says, the concluding, they will run and not grow weary, they will walk and not be faint, offers yet more instances of the parallelism in expression. So we started with parallelism, we're into with parallelism. And now I feel like everybody here, if we go back in time and I said, everybody raise your hand that knows what parallelism is, how many of you now would raise your hand? I need to see it. They need to see it. More hands. See, we've got there. We've got it. You can learn everything in here. The last insert before conclusion was on being worn out. I thought this one was funny. Any grandparents in here, you'll relate to this. We recently discovered why God allowed us to have our children only when we were younger. It happened after we agreed to watch our grandson as his parents took a vacation. The 2-year-old, so you can see where this is going, wore us out mentally and physically. We love our grandchildren and cherish the time we spend with them, but whenever we're on grandchild duty, we take a rest day from the gym. Dealing with the youngsters is enough of a workout. God challenges us to remember him as the one who never tires and never needs to sleep. The creator of the universe holds the record for days without sleep, and he grants energy and knowledge to those who need strength and power when they are at the point of fainting. When you are low on energy, where is the first place you look to for a recharge? And that's what it is. That's what Scripture is. You know, it's that it can be a physical recharge, but it's definitely a spiritual recharge, which can spread physical, emotional. You know, that's where we have to look when you feel that weariness. And in conclusion, it says, no shortage here. When the impact of the coronavirus pandemic began to be felt during the spring of 2020, one result was shortages in various commodities. Now, they were really good here. They didn't say what it was, but I think we all know what the problem was in 2020. Nobody could find toilet paper, amongst other things. But that was, if you knew somebody in your neighborhood that had found toilet paper, that person was like a king. You know, like, wow, where did they get it? Who do they know? Issues with business closings and logistical limitations meant that goods were not as readily available as before. Stores simply ran out of certain items. Even after limiting purchases per customer, many consumers found themselves frustrated at being able to purchase the things they wanted or outright needed, with the convenience to which they were accustomed. Our passage for today reminds us that the God we worship and serve has never been subject to any kind of weakness, attrition, or scarcity in his resources. The prophet's affirmations of God's incomparable sustaining power and his promise to provide strength to those who grow tired or weary have no expiration date. God's power and strength are indeed available to us today, but here a caution must be interjected concerning what the chronicler records. The Lord is with you when you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. The only restriction regarding our access to God's resources is our own sin and unwillingness to trust him. So trust is really at the root of this. You know, you just have to remember and trust in what God really is. You know, and I think it's hard for us sometimes when we're focused on here and the now and us to remember exactly how we got here. You know, the earth is here and we are here on this earth because of the same thing. And that's just how powerful he is. That's why I call this text a God flex, because you just have to go back and remember exactly who we serve. So that's what I had. You know, I'll open it up. Anybody else got anything? I always love to hear from my friends out here. And if not, I'm going to go drink my water. I hope you all have a great week.